Today on The Seeker's Compass, we are speaking with Dr. Bill Richards, the renowned author of Sacred Knowledge, Psychedelics and Religious Experiences. And our map as we travel this mystical path will start with a centering meditation. Then we'll be inviting Dr. Richards to share his rich mystical journey. And as we travel the path, it may be well known to some of you and quite new to others, and we'll likely uncover valuable guidance for our own journey, for our own mystical paths along the way. During the Q&A section, when we open it up to everyone, you'll be able to ask questions of the co-hosts, myself, Dr. John Mundy, Dr. Lowenstein, and also, of course, Dr. Bill Richards. So we're very excited to have all of you here today. And I would now like to turn over the program to Reverend Keith, who will start us out in a meditation. Dr. Keith.
Hello, everybody. So nice to see everybody here today. So we're going to start with a little meditation, little centering exercise, and then invite our guest speaker, Bill, to join us. So if everybody could just adjust their seat so that they're sitting comfortably, they have nice support for their pelvis, so they can sit up straight. So if you're in a really soft chair, you might want to move toward the edge a little bit. Just take a couple of deep breaths, connecting our pelvis to our pillow, our chair, our couch. Just breathing into that connection with the planet. And then as you breathe a little more, see if you can bring that breath all the way up, filling your abdomen, your thorax, and at the same time, getting taller. Start that breath down in your coccyx, the floor of your pelvis, and bring it all the way up to the top of your skull. Nice, full, deep breaths. And as you do that, let your shoulders move. As you breathe in, feel your shoulders move up slowly with your breath to your ears. And then as you gently hold your breath for a few seconds, squeeze those shoulder blades back together, and then slowly let them drop on the exhalation. Just really starting to get into that breath and appreciate its gentleness as it fills you. Pulling the air up through your nostrils, filling your pelvis, abdomen, and thorax with that full breath as your shoulders gently move. Up on the inhalation, back for a second while you hold your breath, and then slowly down. Intention is on the top of your skull, just getting taller as you do this. Appreciating the flow of that air, life energy, filling us up from our pelvis, to our abdomen, to our thorax, all the way up to our neck. Holding it ever so gently and letting it flow back out. Appreciating the stillness, the calmness that comes with slowing your breath and paying attention to it. And let's have everybody slowly come back to the room. After that, gentle centering exercise. Welcome again. It is really my honor and privilege today to introduce you to my friend, Dr. William Richards. Bill, as he likes to be called, is one of the pioneers in the research of religious experiences and psychedelics. For most of his career, he has worked as a psychologist, a therapist, and a researcher. He is a unique individual in that he walks through his day seeing the divine in nature, in music as he plays the organ, in sacred structures, and all he sees throughout the day. But most importantly, he sees and communes with the divine in everyone that crosses his path, every moment of every day. His active work in the field began in 1963 in Germany with a deep spiritual experience. In 1966, his paper on the implications of LSD in experimental mysticism, co-authored with Walter Pahnke, was published, and he has not stopped leading the field since. From 1967 to 1977, he pursued psychotherapy research funded by the National Institute of Mental Health into the use of psychedelics, including psilocybin and LSD, at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. The protocols were designed to investigate the promise of psychedelic substances in the treatment of alcoholism, depression, narcotic addiction, and the psychological distress associated with physical cancer, and also their use in the training of religious and mental health professionals. In the 1970s, he was the last person, I believe, in the country to legally give psychedelics to another person in a research setting, as the government closed down that funding in the States and most of Europe. In the 1990s, he was instrumental in getting research started again with his late colleague Roland Griffith at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, Bayview Medical Center. It is here that he and his colleague embraced the research of psilocybin, the active molecule, and what is referred to as sacred mushrooms. The work continues at Johns Hopkins today, and the original small group has grown into a leading research center and is now called the Center of Psychedelic and Consciousness Research. Bill wrote a wonderful book, Sacred Knowledge, Psychedelics and Religious Experiences, that was published in 2016 by Columbia University Press and has been translated into many languages. Bill's graduate degrees include a Master of Divinity from Yale Divinity School, a Master's in Sacred Theology from Andover Newton Theological School, and a PhD from Catholic University, as well as studies with Abraham Maslow at Brandeis University and Hans Karl Lerner at the University of Gutenberg in Germany, where his first involvement with psychedelic research began in 1963. It is with much love and gratitude that I introduce you to my good friend, Dr. William Richards, one of the most generous, humble, insightful, and brilliant individuals that I've had the pleasure to know. Bill, thank you for coming. It's all yours.
Thank you. Well, Keith, it takes one to know one. It's an honor to be with all of you. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be with you. I'm just getting used to this term, modern mystic. I think we are all modern mystics, or at least we're on paths developing deeper awareness. I'm going to lecture here for an hour to an hour and a quarter. I hope you don't fall asleep. And then we will have a brief break and then time for discussion. And I value the perspectives of each of you There are many paths up the spiritual mountain, and each of us needs to find and pursue his or her own, I believe. There's no one way that's right for everyone. But trust your own journey, and hopefully some of the things I share with you this morning will be helpful. General orientation. Let's just reflect together on the whole phenomenon of religion, whether Christian or Islamic or Jewish or Taoist or Hindu. All religious enterprises have their sacred scriptures, their theological formulations, their rituals and ceremonies, their social expressions of activism in the world, and the dimension of personal, devotional, private religious life, revelation in the present time. And you might imagine a pie chart and just kind of check in with yourself. How much of your religious life would be based in each of these areas at the present time? There's no right or wrong. There are many different personality structures and different life histories. I would suggest all of these sectors are important and worthy of serious attention. But today we're going to focus on number 5 here, primary religious experience, revelation in the present. Many ways that we explore this. Meditative procedures of all different kinds, focused attention, diet, sleep deprivation, breathing techniques, Stan Groff's holotropic breath work. These practices actually have physiological effects on our bodies. They change our blood chemistry, and they open up other states of consciousness. There's sensory isolation. Some people love to lie in tanks of salt water at body temperature in darkness, and they discover that other states of consciousness open up for them. Or sensory overload, being immersed in rock bands or symphony orchestras, and we can sometimes be swept into other states of awareness. For those women here, you have the opportunity, and for some, you may have memories of very beautiful experiences during natural childbirth, which of course also radically alters physiological functioning. Some lucky people have very exceptional sexual experiences. Some of us, in the midst of artistic creation or athletic feats, suddenly awaken to a larger world. It's worth noting that these other states of consciousness often happen spontaneously, and they happen in good atheists sometimes in the middle of the night. They're not always cultivated, they're not always wanted, but many people discover them and then have to find the words to attempt to describe them and own them. And then there's where we're focusing today on psychedelic substances, either natural mushrooms or cacti or toads or whatever, or synthesized molecules that are born in test tubes but are unquestionably sacred. Now, the unique contribution of psychedelics, I would suggest, is their potency and their reliability. I mean, we can meditate together many afternoons, and some of us may have more meaningful experiences than others. But if we take an adequate dose of a psychedelic substance together, you can be sure that something pretty impressive is going to happen. Psychedelics are powerful tools. We need to use them wisely and hopefully more and more legally in the near future. But they reliably have very powerful effects. And another unique contribution of psychedelics, I would suggest, is their safety when they are competently administered, ingested, that these substances, at least the major ones, psilocybin, mescaline, DPT, DMT, LSD, these are non-addictive substances that are essentially non-toxic. That doesn't mean they're safe to just throw in your mouth to see what will happen. But with preparation and some good psychoeducation, they can be incredibly valuable for many people. I would suggest that we might view them as sacred molecules that provide opportunities to access healing processes and to discover new knowledge, rather than just viewing them as drugs that have drug effects. Okay? They open a door. They provide an opportunity. Imagine yourself opening a door. What do? Do you just stand at the door? Do you slam it shut? Or do you enter into the landscape beyond the door? And if so, with what attitudes, with what courage, with what willingness to learn? So what matters is what we do with this opportunity when other states of consciousness open up to us. And there are many variables that affect what happens. I've come to respect the wisdom of our human minds in choreographing the content of any particular psychedelic or meditative experience. Psychedelics are often viewed as teachers in the ayahuasca community. When you take the sacred ayahuasca drink, you go in to get a lesson from Mother Ayahuasca. And it may be a very painful, difficult lesson. It may be tumbling through some unresolved grief or guilt, but it's in the interest of your personal spiritual development. Psilocybin cubensis is often called the golden teacher, and there's a reason for that. Now, when we go into these other states of consciousness, there are many, many strata, many varieties of experiencing. There is no such thing, I would suggest, as the psychedelic experience, just as there is no thing as the meditative experience, okay? There are many, many worlds within us. There are states that we value that have potentially positive impact, personal insights, visionary states, and mystical consciousness, which I will describe in significant detail soon. But let's acknowledge there are also potentially negative impacts of experiences of panic, of paranoia, deep despair, confusion. And frankly, with psychedelics, these states are extremely rare when people are well prepared and are grounded in a healthy relationship when they receive the substance. And there are these so-called neutral experiences, both in meditation and with psychedelics, of perceptual change, of mild aesthetic patterns that may be interesting, but they're really not life transformative to most people. It's the so-called tie-dye t-shirt effect. It may be colorful, interesting, but it's nowhere near what we would call mystical or transcendental. Now, I've been asked to say a few words about my personal orientation. Frankly, I don't go around calling myself a modern mystic. Maybe that's my problem. Gee, if I was doing social activism, I wouldn't have trouble calling myself a social worker. But the term mystic, for many people, triggers kind of images of psychic mediums with turbans and crystal balls. That's not what we're talking about. Um, and yet the term mystic is coming to be understood. Mystical consciousness is now a scientific term. You can find it in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, in the Journal of Psychopharmacology, as well as in uh, journals of religious scholarship. But I would suggest we are all potential mystics. We are all on spiritual quests, moving through time, trying to develop and awaken more fully. Now, my childhood was religious in a kind of liberal Methodist style. Um, we said grace at dinner. I said my prayers before I went to bed. I did read my Bible faithfully until I got to theological school, which is interesting. But my religious experience was a sense in childhood of kind of sort of nature mysticism, warmth, loving presence, um, a closeness to the divine, if you will, but nothing like occurred when I first received psilocybin. And as described in my book, that occurred at the University of Göttingen at age 23, when I was a volunteer in a study with some new drug I had never heard of called psilocybin. And I was led to a little basement room, given an injection, and left alone. And I expected to experience things from my childhood. And instead, this very profound transcendental state of consciousness opened up. And in many ways, the rest of my life has been footnotes to that experience, that initial awakening, which was really a profound unitive consciousness. We'll talk more about that in the next few minutes. But that led to becoming a psychologist, albeit with a training in comparative religion and psychology of religion. Research in Germany and Boston, and 10 years at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center in Baltimore, and from 1999 on at Johns Hopkins University, and recently at the Aquilino Cancer Center in Rockville, Maryland. And as you may know, psychedelic research is bursting out all over internationally at the present time. I often like to reflect on the word enlightenment. It's not on or off. You are enlightened or you're not. I like to view it as a process, like personal development, self-actualization, spiritual growth, more and more light. And sometimes that process leads through very difficult, painful areas of human experiencing. But it's all part of the journey and a process. I'm still in that process. I'm still integrating the insights that have occurred in my life with and without psychedelics. And I suspect each of you are as well. Now, many of you, I'm sure, have read Herman Hesse's Siddhartha, or not Siddhartha, Steppenwolf. And you know about the green door that appears in the garden wall just for you at just the right time in your life. And if you have the courage to open that door, you enter the magic theater in Hesse's language that has as many doors into as many boxes as you please, 10 or 100 or 1,000, and behind each door, exactly what you seek awaits you. What you seek may not be what you expect or what you think you want, but it's the next step in your personal spiritual development. Now, as we go into these other states of consciousness, set and setting are incredibly important. Set is your capacity on that day, in that moment, to choose to trust, to entrust your mind, your life, to the states of consciousness that are opening up, to relinquish control. I think that's what Kierkegaard meant by the leap of faith. It's like diving off this diving board when you don't know the temperature of the water. But you know, others have done it and they say it's worthwhile. And people are going to ensure your safety while you're doing this, whether you're meditating or receiving a psychedelic substance. Set requires openness, honesty, curiosity. You are exactly where you are in life, and you're manifesting courage to explore, to confront, to suffer, to learn, to receive, and above all, to go beyond what the rational mind can understand or articulate in language. This is moving into pure experiencing. It's a bit like falling in love. You are going beyond what you can ordinarily talk about. Setting promotes safety, a sense of confidentiality, being with someone you don't have to impress. You can simply be yourself and experience whatever wants to be experienced. It helps to have some well-chosen music, and that's a whole topic in itself. In an interpersonal relationship that's empathic, respectful, non-invasive, you may forget the person is there and not need the person during many psychedelic sessions. But if you do, that person is immediately present to provide structure, support, compassion, reassurance. Now, here's our first lab at Johns Hopkins. As you can see, It's a very comfortable living room type of environment with some nice art, a nice stereo system, confidentiality. And many people have received psychedelics in this place, and now we have many rooms like this. But you can see that we add nice, cozy flannel sheets. That comes from my childhood in northern Michigan up by Lake Superior. You feel extra safe when you got flannel sheets, at least I do. Eye shade, headphones, a rose to focus on as you come out from the inner world to the outer world, and two caring people. Uh, in this old photograph, this is myself and Mary Casamano with my son Brian, who is now a psychedelic researcher with us. Let's just acknowledge in passing with psychedelics, there are also physiological factors. Dosage is important. We know with psilocybin, for example, from careful research done at Hopkins, that you need at least 25 milligrams to access transcendental forms of awareness. Most people do anyway. If it's less than that, you may have some very valuable psychodynamic insights, but it's not likely to be mystical in a classical spiritual sense. Some people find it much easier to relinquish control than others for psychological and perhaps physiological reasons. We know that our bodies naturally produce dimethyltryptamine, a very powerful psychedelic in ayahuasca, and ultimately in psilocybin as well. So folks, we are all in violation of federal law by virtue of being human. It's often said that the dosage of DMT in us today is probably very small, hardly significant, but I wonder to what extent the intensity, the amount of it, and other neurotransmitters rise and fall under different circumstances. Diet may affect our readiness to experience other states of consciousness, and various other medications. SSRIs, if you're being treated for depression, we now know that does not counteract the effect of a psychedelic, but you may require a larger dosage. Now, come with me into the phenomenology of alternative states. We know that some of these inner worlds open up into very beautiful, bright, cheerful places. Others open up into rather dark, scary places. That's not good or bad. The spiritual life includes, for many of us, the dark night of the soul, of going through difficult, painful places. And some would say, if you're going into a dark place, trust, let go, go ahead, explore it. This is part of the journey. It's not just having a bad trip, okay? The dark night, we've all seen the Milky Way. It's pretty fantastic. Sometimes dark nights are incredibly beautiful, and don't be afraid of them. All it is transient suffering, and suffering can have meaning. Often, what is first encountered is what we call psycholytic therapy with low dosage. And it's the content of ordinary psychotherapy, dealing with relationships and guilt and grief and anger. And that's very important terrain in the spiritual life. But it's not what we're focusing on today. Let's just acknowledge its importance. This just my favorite picture of confronting your inner demons here. But psychedelic therapy includes visionary archetypal experiences and what I will focus on is mystical consciousness. Archetypal visionary experiences include visions of geometric patterns, mandalas, fractals, often images of Gothic arches or Islamic domes, gemstones, precious metals. Where does this stuff come from? People are seeing this wearing eye shades, lying on a couch with their eyes closed. That in itself is pretty incredible. Often visionary landscapes of other civilizations that some people feel is suggestive of reincarnation. Visions of gods and goddesses, birth themes. But the distinction between the visionary world here's these geometric patterns. And if you can imagine, it's not just like looking at a picture in a museum. It's a multidimensional world that you can float through, that you can become, that you can explore. You almost like you can swim or fly in and through these abstract patterns. Jeremy and Arby suggested that they may be a way of experiencing our neurons in some sense, but they're very impressive and often very multidimensional, very beautiful. And there are images of good old Jehovah, and here's Alex Gray's Christ, the Buddha, Kuan Yin, Hindu gods, gemstones. You may know the Hindu concept of 330 million deities that are all facets of one incredible diamond of spiritual truth, which is the Atman-Brahman unity. Aldous Huxley wrote a wonderful little essay, which I recommend if you don't know it. Why are precious stones precious? Why do we give these little crystals to one another at weddings and special occasions? And he says it's precisely because within our minds there are innate gemstones, that they have spiritual meaning. And so we treasure these little rocks and give them to one another. Here's a brief quote of a vision of the Christ. This person said, I experienced a magnificent vision of Christ standing motionless in resplendent, radiant beauty. He had form, but I could almost see through him. There was immeasurable power, love. I did not walk to him, but was there, space and time meaningless. I was bodiless, selfless, yet I could grasp his feet and ankles. I embraced this formless form with an infinite love. Friendly power and love filled the light beyond words, unforgettable. Now, when we think of LSD and psychedelics, we often think of Buddhist and Hindu traditions. But it's important to realize that Jewish and Islamic and Christian visions also occur for many people. Now, it may be a pedantic distinction, but in visionary or archetypal experiences, I would suggest that the ego, the everyday personality, my Bill Richards, your whatever your name is, that we are still present to some extent, looking at, relating to, being awed by, trembling before, devoting ourselves to, we're in dialogue with something within the human mind. And that's why we call it visionary. There's an ego having a vision. Mystical consciousness is often described as the culmination of that. It's another state of awareness where the ego has died, is transcended, and becomes part of this eternal oneness. The Hindu concept is the drop of water of the ego merging with the ocean of Brahman. So it's very hard to talk about because you, the ego, weren't there, but yet the drop of water is there in the ocean. So you died and were reborn. You weren't there, and yet when you're reborn, you discover that it's in your memory banks. And when these intense experiences happen, they usually feel more real, more fundamental than ordinary life, and they have an indelible impact. They kind of stay with you for the rest of your life, typically. They may be very sacred. You share it with very few people, but you know it's reality deep within yourself. No, this mystical unitive consciousness has many names. Abe Maslow called them major peak experiences. And he found that they occurred in very creative people, people like Eleanor Roosevelt. Everything okay there? People like Eleanor Roosevelt or Albert Einstein reported spontaneous experiences of this nature. Uh, it's interesting in the scientific literature, it's part of our embarrassment at science encountering the sacred. But instead of talking about unitive experiences, we tend to write about mystical type experiences or non-dual experiences. But that's okay. Philosophical terms, the numinous, the one, the ground luminosity of pure awareness, the void that contains all reality, and so on. Huxley felt it was the source of the Platonic view of the world, all emanating from the one, the so-called perennial philosophy. I like to think of it as just a glimpse of enlightenment, of beginning to wake up to the deeper mysteries of human consciousness. In the world religions, we have different terms that point towards it. In Christianity, it's called the beatific vision. Islam, Bakwa wa Fana. Judaism, Sakal Muthla. Taoism, Wu Wei. Hinduism, Moksha or Samadhi. Buddhism, Nirvana. Celestial Buddha fields, the Pure Lands, the Taurine. Now, this is so vast. We could argue about, are they all the same? Is it the same thing? And I think it's a bit like arguing about, is the Milky Way the same tonight as it was last night? It is incredibly vast. It is forever in process. It is forever changing. It is totally awesome. Now meet Walter Pahnke, my good old friend, brilliant Harvard scholar who was stupid enough to go scuba diving and drown at age 40. I've always had this fantasy, if I met him again, I'd give him a big hug and then I'd give him a kick in the rear. But Walter did the famous Good Friday study at as part of his PhD at Harvard, where he gave psychedelics to a bunch of theological students from Andover Newton Theological School and demonstrated scientifically that those who received psilocybin had mystical experiences and those who received nicotinic acid did not, though everything else was held constant. But in his thesis, building on William James and Walter Stace, James Bissett Pratt, other psychologists of religion, he developed this definition of mystical consciousness that I will explore with you today. And this is a state of consciousness that, when described or experienced, includes unity, transcendence of time and space, intuitive knowledge, sacredness, deeply felt positive mood, and claims of ineffability, paradoxicality. He also had a couple other categories: transiency, which came from William James and the varieties of religious experience, to differentiate it from psychotic states that may go on for a long time, and persisting positive changes of attitudes and behavior, which of course is not part of the phenomenology of the experience itself, but what we hope to measure in the research world in terms of what good is this experience, what comes out of it, how does it change human attitudes and behavior. Okay, come with me into unity, approached in two ways, internal or external. Basically, internal unity tends to occur with closed eyes, external with open eyes. Here's a description. I won't bore you with too much of this, but this is a delightful one by a alcoholic in treatment with LSD. It says, the most emotional experience I had during the day was feeling as though I had died and was drifting into space, moving away from the earth. I started to become very uneasy and nervous, and then the clouds seemed to move aside for me to pass. I was terribly frightened. Felt so alone out there all by myself. Sometimes I seemed to be moving much faster, the clouds parting more swiftly. I wanted very much to go back, but I knew I could not. I began to drift more slowly and become more calm. The clouds had gone by from here. It is very difficult to explain. There was nothing. It was like drifting into empty space. It was so beautifully bright you could see nothing. Then far off, a small cloud or flower appeared. The beauty and colors were so intense it brought tears to my eyes, but I could not turn away from it. I stretched out my arms to encircle it, but it was growing like a beautiful flower. It became larger and larger until I could no longer control it, and then it burst into such magnificence and beauty as everything seemed to open up. I was laughing at the happiness it gave me. I screamed as I pointed. At that time, I thought I was God, but I couldn't be. If this was God, This must be heaven. I became confused again. If God was here and I was here, I was God. God was me at that time. It seemed all men were here. We must truly all be one. I thought, this is what has been said about eternal life. Okay, one more description of an internal unity here. I first went to a place that seemed to completely lack the qualities of this world as we know it. I seemed to transcend time and space and lost complete identification with the real world. Seemed to be as if I was going back from this world to another world before this life had occurred. The changing to what was before this life seemed to be involved in a bright silver mass of energy with a strong electrical current. Strangely enough, I felt I had been in that mass of energy at one time before. When I was there, everything seemed to make sense. It was a very beautiful world, one in which love was very much a part. The basic theme that I perceived was that life continues to go on, and we are basically some form of essence from a supreme being and are part of that supreme being. I don't have the fear of death I once had. I am willing to accept the plan of the Creator and go on when it becomes necessary to the next segment of his creation. I have found that everyday living seems to be much more enjoyable. Small things I may have overlooked, I seem to appreciate now. I have a much greater and deeper understanding of other people, a much greater capacity to try to fulfill other people's needs. Overall, I think I am a much more content individual, having had the great opportunity to just glimpse for a very short moment the overall thinking of God, of possibly being brought into his confidence for just a brief period, to be reassured that there is a very beautiful, loving, masterful plan in the universe for all of us. This was a 39-year-old cancer patient with very advanced cancer, a father of several children, who fortunately lived for about a decade after this experience. But you can sense how meaningful it was for him. External unity, this is with eyes open. Here's a brief description: profound feelings of unity with a tulip and a rose. Looking at it as an object that seemed to come alive before my eyes. Its petals seemed to breathe as slowly and gracefully they unfolded, seeming to express the ultimate in beauty. Fascinated, I watched these movements of cosmic gentleness until suddenly I knew the rose. That is to say, I somehow became one with the rose, no longer existing as an ego passively viewing an object in its environment. Although in the objectivity of my critical mind, I knew there were no physical changes in the flower, subjectively, I seemed to see it in a totally new perspective, one which elicited tears and deep feelings of reverence. It seemed to stand out in naked beauty, as though it were the only thing existing in the world. Walter Houston Clark, psychologist of religion at Andover Newton, suggested that maybe that's what Moses experienced with the burning bush in terms of external unity. One more brief description. This is in the auditory framework. The various pieces of music were wonderful, multidimensional. I could hear tiny variations and subtle changes in shadings in the voices and instruments. as if I were inside the mind of the composer as he heard it. There was a sense of the composer touching the divine and channeling its perfection down to the human level so that other people could be aware of it and uplifted too. But simultaneous awareness of the impossibility of the task. Imperfect human beings, imperfect instruments, imperfect voices are involved. But somehow all of that perfection, in all of it, was woven into the perfection that the music was channeling. I was inside the music, the composer, the players, the singers, the shaft of the woodwind, the metal keys of the woodwind, and the fingers pressing the keys. Okay, so much for unity. Category number 2, transcendence of time and space. What can we say about that other than this is what religious language calls eternity, mathematical language would call infinity. It's not time going on into the future. It is the present moment opening up and somehow including past, present, and future in the eternal now. Best expressed in art. My partner Edna drew this for the cover of my book, which attempts to capture the sense of going into a vortex. This is Alex Gray's expression of it. The artist Alice Kelly. And then we come to category 3, intuitive knowledge, that these mystical states are more than intense emotion. They seem to entail knowledge. You know something, you behold something, you recognize something in an intuitive way. You may know Rudolf Otto, the idea of the holy, who called our attention to our rational intellectual processes, our ability to be irrational, but then the reality of the intuitive, what he called the non-rational, as a serious way of knowing and discovering truth. William James called it the noetic quality of mystical experience. James, he was this guy at Harvard who went around sniffing nitrous oxide around the turn of the century, 1902, long before Timothy Leary. And he is honored at Hopkins. There's a beautiful social science skyscraper called the William James Center. I don't know if Timothy Leary will ever be recognized at Harvard. Maybe a little sculpture in a shaded quadrangle someday. We shall see. But this tradition at Harvard of exploring consciousness is very active right now. And the Boston Psychedelic Research Group is one of the most organized, dynamic groups of psychedelic scholars currently in existence. Okay, what is known? Clearly the reality of God. Some people don't like the word God, and that's all right. It triggers sitting on hard pews in long, boring sermons for some people. You don't have to use the word God, but it points to what we might call transcendence, the deeper unitive states of consciousness within us. There was the head of biology at Yale used to call it the purposive properties of protoplasm. Call it what you will, but there is something within us that is incredibly beautiful, intelligent, and wise. the relativity of time, immortality, the indestructibility of consciousness. I mean, we could argue that it might be one big delusion, but when you're there, it seems absolutely obvious that consciousness is not subject to temporal limitations. The spiritual interconnectedness of us all, what the Hindus call the bejeweled net of Indra, or we call the brotherhood of man, or the unity of humankind. It's a very interesting concept to explore, actually, because if that is the real reality, the deeper reality that we are all interconnected, right now, if we think we're isolated, independent egos in the world, we've forgotten, we've become estranged from the ground of being, if you will, in Paul Tillich's language. And when we wake up, we discover that we are all part of one great unity. The absoluteness of beauty, the primacy of love, that love is much more than a mushy human emotion. Love is creative, powerful, intelligent energy at the very core of being. You may know the end of Dante's Divine Comedy. The very last line is, "It is love that moves the sun and other stars." The wisdom, the meaningful unfolding of the psyche, and the intensity of these states. Jeremy Narby is fond of having said, "Once you've seen, you cannot unsee." This state of consciousness feels more fundamental, more basic than our awareness in everyday living. And ultimately, it's not something we can argue about. It's like, how do you know you love your spouse or your children? You simply intuitively affirm it and you base your life on it. And I think that is also the path of the mystic. You don't have to convince other people about it, but you live with it and you live out of the insights that accompany it. Sacredness. I think I illustrate that best with just art of Gothic imagery, which often occurs in other states of consciousness. In domes, here's a synagogue in Hungary. This is the Blue Mosque in Isfahan, Iran. I have no doubt that the architect who designed this either took psilocybin or was a natural mystic. This is the imagery that frequently occurs during psychedelic sessions. The rose windows, this is a mandala of Shiva from Bali. The dome of a great mosque. Notice how you could almost see it as the end of a neuron or something like that. This is the dome of St. Peter's in Rome. In and through, even in the center of the dome, it goes on further. Pretty awesome. And I think people, even those who have no religious training or in their childhood, when they enter a great mosque or a high vaulted Gothic cathedral, there's an intuitive sense of awe and reverence. And it may be something in our nervous system that simply resonates with that architecture. Deeply felt positive mood, joy, love, peace, purity, blessedness, so on. People talk of homecoming. I've been here before and I forgot it. It's not that the mystical world gets more and more bizarre and uncanny, but the deeper we go into it, the more familiar it feels. There's often the sense, I've been here before and I forgot it. Welcome home. You belong here. It's always been here. And I like to note cosmic playfulness. The Hindus do this better than we do in our Western religions. But the idea of the lightness, the playfulness of the dance of creation, um, all is well ultimately. And then the final category here, ineffability and paradoxicality. Meet my friend Gorg. Gorg is the caveman who is transported into Manhattan today, and he sees skyscrapers and jet planes and subways and cell phones. And then he zapped back to his cave, and his wife says, Gorg, what did you experience? What does he say? It was big, it was loud, it was impressive, it was awesome, maybe. But he doesn't have the vocabulary to speak of it. But there's a sense that there was an order, that perhaps some future generation could develop language enough to speak of it. And that's what it's like in these transcendental states. We need words that don't exist yet. Maybe if we knew Sanskrit, we'd have a few more words. Okay? Inadequate vocabulary. There's something about the structure of language itself, a subject and a predicate, that's a temporal sequence. And that doesn't work well in talking about states of consciousness outside of time. The paradoxical nature of the experiences. When people try to express it in words, they find themselves saying, well, I died, but I was never so alive. The ultimate reality was one, but it contained everything that is. It was more than a person, but it was permeated by love. Okay, you understand why the Russian poet Tuchev says, when it comes to describing mystical consciousness, a word that's spoken is a lie. Or the scripture in the Tao Te Ching, those who speak do not know, those who know do not speak. Silence. Well, it makes it hard to have a program on mystical consciousness because we need to use words. And we use the words as best we can. But I think ultimately some of this content may be expressed best in art and music and dance, as opposed to long essays. I was once on the thesis committee of a student who wrote a thesis on the deepest levels of human consciousness. And I kind of thought she'd present one piece of paper, maybe with a symbol Om in the middle in India ink. And instead, she came up with several hundred pages of English words. But that's what we expect in our universities, okay? But ultimately, it transcends language. Here's a wonderful mandala of Escher's of the innocent angels and the devilish demons all being part of one great unity. So, folks, here's your exam for the day. Can you define mystical consciousness as we attempt to measure it in the research world? Unity, transcendence of time and space, intuitive knowledge, sacredness, deeply felt positive mood, ineffability, all at the same time, maybe in different degrees of completion, different degrees of intensity, and different language used to try to express it. Now, moving rapidly ahead here, what's it good for? How do we understand these states? Clearly, this is not just another drug-induced high. Um, although there are exceptional experiences people have with marijuana that may be mystical, but most people don't get that deep into the psyche with marijuana. Is it cognitive impairment? Well, it's a different kind of cognition, a different kind of knowing. No need to call it impairment, though. Is it a schizoid flight from reality? Well, maybe there's more than one reality. Um, there aren't many true Freudians around anymore. But is it just regression to the womb? Infantile functioning? Well, I think we would have to say, Brother Freud, there's more going on in that womb than you ever imagined. Is it wish fulfillment? The result of suggestion? Actually, we've ruled that out in several very well-designed research studies where everyone has the same preparation, the same music, the same therapeutic relationship, the same expectations. But some people receive a psychedelic and some people receive Ritalin or nicotinic acid. And those who receive the psychedelic have the mystical experiences. Those who receive the controlled substance do not. So this is not something that's suggested that we try to make happen somehow. It's a discovery within our minds. What are the physiological changes, processes? Who knows? But to just locate it in brain activity really doesn't explain anything. Correlation is not causation. And frankly, folks, we still don't know what we are. We don't know what consciousness is. We can dissect a lot of brains and we can't find a person anywhere. We are still crawling out of the primeval mud, I think, when it comes to understanding the mystery of human consciousness. The religious word, of course, is revelation, discovering a spiritual core. Now, what good are these experiences? They certainly do not guarantee sainthood. It's the beginning, the awakening, the beginning of the spiritual life. It's not the culmination of it, okay? Good old, my beloved friend Houston Smith, who distinguished between having religious experiences and living religious lives, between exploring states of consciousness and developing traits of behavior. That's the task of the religious life in time. I love the ox herding metaphor of the spiritual quest. Very briefly, as we enter the spiritual search, we begin by searching for the ox. And we find the first footprints, and we first sight it, and we approach it. And as time goes by, we dialogue with it, we struggle with it, we tame it. And the day may come where you ride upon the ox. And you may even become the ox. And there may be a period of unitive consciousness where there's no ox and there's no you. But then, in this metaphor, the culmination of the spiritual development is riding the ox back home from the mountaintop to the marketplace, to the village, to chop wood and carry water and be the humble bodhisattva in the world. Why is mystical consciousness helpful? It leaves in its wake awe, gratitude, not taking life for granted. Buddhism reminds us we're having one precious human life. Don't take it for granted. We're here for 100 years or less. We might never have been, but by some miracle we are. Let's make the most of it. David Steigelrost, still with us at 98 in Switzerland. If you don't know his website, gratefulness.org, you might check it out. It's a wonderful, inspiring meditation. But he says the essence of the spiritual life is gratitude. In the wake of these experiences, there's a change in self-concept. What you understand yourself to be and what you understand others to be, and the very view of what the nature of reality may be, changes. And also self-worth. When you discover such incredible beauty and intelligence within your mind, it's pretty hard to devalue yourself. Inner resources, interconnectedness. This is one reason psychedelic therapy is so effective in the treatment of addictions. When you've had or remember a mystical experience, there's no way you can view yourself as worthless or without the resources to get control over your addiction. Your concept of who you are has changed. So there's rebirth, there's empowerment. There's often, in the wake of mystical consciousness, a new connectedness with nature, appreciation of beauty, and not to underestimate loss of fear of death. I have the privilege, have had and continue to have, of working with cancer patients in psychedelic therapy who are all realizing that they really are mortal. And how do you come to terms with that? And after transcendental experiences with psychedelics, they clearly say they're no longer afraid of death. But what is so interesting to me is that there's also no attempt to speed up death. They don't become suicidal. Rather, the present moment seems to open up, and relationships and their own creativity, their own living of their own lives becomes important. The present moment opens, and they know that death will eventually occur, and they kind of look forward to it with kind of a curiosity. It'll be interesting when I get there. I wonder what it'll be like. But there's no attempt to get there faster, which is fascinating, especially in people with significant pain and very poor prognosis. Now, very briefly, before we move into discussion, let me introduce you to some of my guides in life that may also be yours. Brother Wayne Teasdale. I hear you're all reading his Mystic Heart, and he has another book, A Monk in the World, but the Mystic Heart is a wonderful book. Wayne was both a Buddhist and or a Hindu really, and a Christian monk. He's the only guest I've had in my home who, when there were 20 minutes before lunch, said, "Let's meditate. We've got 20 minutes." Like meditating for him was like eating chocolate or something. He just loved it. And a wonderful enlightened being who coined the term the interspiritual age, that he feels we are entering. Teilhard de Chardin, who I never got to meet, but he suggests that we are all spiritual beings currently having human experiences. He's a wonderful model of being both a scientist. He was a paleontologist who participated in the discovery of Peking man, and he wrote these scientific books on the phenomenon of man, the future of man. But he also wrote as a mystic the works like the Divine Milieu and Hymn of the Universe that are very inspiring, poetic, devotional works. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, reminds us that the view that all mental processes are necessarily physical is a metaphysical assumption, not a scientific fact. He has great respect for science, but also values the intuitive. One of his books, The Universe in a Single Atom, the idea that the microscopic world of astronomy and the microscopic world of microbiology might somehow be one and the same, is a theme that comes up in the literature of mysticism. Very fascinating. Paul Tillich, who coined the term the ground of being, very much like the Atman-Brahman unity in Hinduism, the courage to be, accepting that you are accepted, the really real God as opposed to our many concepts of God in the world religions. Going way back, Shankara and Ramanuja, Shankara who stressed the unitive consciousness, Ramanuja who also honored the Ishvara, the personal manifestation of the divine. And as psychedelic research demonstrates, the same person can experience both. It's not which is right. They're both right. They're both within the human repertoire, the vision of the deity and the unitive consciousness. The medieval mystics, Teresa and John of the Cross. Teresa was one liberated woman who, besides going into her deep ecstasies and writing the interior castle, which is a classic you should all know. But she also was an incredible administrator who managed several monasteries in the early 16th century, was a very liberated woman in her own time. Just to note the medieval idea that the spiritual journey begins with awakening and then moves into purgation, sometimes through the dark night of the soul and gradual illumination. Those with Jewish background would value Reb Zalman, Dr. Shalomi, Muslims, Abu al-Ghazali wrote about 70 books way back in the early 12th century, certainly a Sufi mystic with much to teach us. Native American and Maria Sabina, a lot of wisdom there, often not written, but passed on from generation to generation, waiting to be appreciated and discovered. Abe Maslow, a Jewish mystic who never took psychedelics. I had the honor of being his research assistant in 1966, the year he published The Psychology of Science. Abe had a very acute heart condition, actually died jogging at age 62, so we did not want to give him a psychedelic. But frankly, he didn't need it. He had very spontaneous, transcendental experiences. but his books, taught us psychology of being, religions, values, and peak experiences, and the psychology of science are especially worth your time. Vanya Palmer's from the Zen Buddhist tradition, still active in Switzerland and valuing psychedelics as tools in the spiritual life. Coming into the Cranston time, meet Hunt Priest, if you don't know him. Legare.org is a new organization building bridges of understanding between or traditional Christianity and the psychedelic research frontier. And Zach Kamenetz doing the same thing from a Jewish perspective, reactivating the rich resources in the Jewish tradition of mysticism. And recently, Richard Rohr, who is trusted and respected by many people. He has a daily message that goes out to countless people that is nurturing spiritually. And recently he has come to honor and acknowledge the potential of psychedelics responsibly and wisely used. For those of you of philosophical inclination, I recommend Karl Jaspers, who over and over says, we are more than we know or ever can know. Basically, that we go into the psyche in and through grief and guilt and fear of death with trust that he called philosophical faith, and we are met by this force called love deep within the psyche. Heidegger, we are thrown into existence, we discover ourselves in the world, we are moving towards death. That's the essence of human life. And Martin Buber, there's a quote of his I like to leave you with that shows something of the conflict of the rational mind struggling with revelatory experience. In one of his books, at age 69, he wrote, "Now from my own unforgettable experience, I know well that there is a state in which the bonds of the personal nature of life seem to have fallen away from us and we experience an undivided unity. But I do not know what the soul willingly imagines and indeed is bound to imagine. Mine too once did it, that in this I had attained to a union with the primal being or the Godhead. That is an exaggeration no longer permitted to the responsible understanding." Okay, I wish we could give Martin a few psilocybin sessions and see how he might amend that statement. But it is a big task for all of us to own and value the richness of our own religious heritages and to also be open to the universal. Many paths up the spiritual mountain, perhaps each worth traveling and full of wisdom and richness. And as a rule, it's good to study and explore the one that we are born into. Many applications of psychedelics in medicine, education, and religion. I think the day will come when they are used in seminary education and in retreat centers in perfectly legal, responsible ways. In the meantime, let's work well and do good research, communicate respectively, get psilocybin and other major psychedelics off Schedule 1 or Class A in Europe, train, certify researchers, and get insurance coverage. So the man on the street who can't spell psychedelic and doesn't have a tie-dye t-shirt can have access to these forms of consciousness with the help of psychedelics. And once there is access, it's interesting, many people become committed to various meditative disciplines and might not want to take a psychedelic again. But it's a valuable tool for many in moving forward significantly. There are all kinds of publications. If you like to look at statistics, they're there for you. Just go to the various websites and you'll find them. Okay, let me hear your voices.
We've captured a lot of questions in chat. I think that our co-hosts here all have questions. Why don't we start with you, Keith, and then we'll go to John, and then I'll pick up the tail end there. So after you, Dr. Lowenstein.
All right. Well, hi, Bill. Gee, that was really wonderful. Thank you so much. I have a question about, excuse me, about meditation and psychedelics. And so, my understanding with Houston Smith is he had psychedelic experiences in the 60s, a couple. And, he came to the conclusion that, couldn't necessarily differentiate a meditative induced state or a psychedelic induced state. But he seemed to come to the conclusion that a psychedelic experience without an underlying contemplative practice was not as useful as a psychedelic experience by itself. And so when I looked at your paper from 2018, where you used 3 different doses of psilocybin, 2 higher ones, 1 very low as a placebo, but then broke the group up into 3 groups. One that got standard support, one that got a lot of support, but then the last group got very significant spiritual instructions, and that they were given a book on how to meditate, they were given a journal and expected to journal, they were expected to practice meditation each day, do some mindfulness and awareness exercises each day, and journal. And that group, their changes were more profound and long-lasting than the other 2. So given that study and your experience and your relationship with Houston Smith, I wonder if you could comment on that scope of things.
Yeah, certainly. I certainly fully endorse the importance of the spiritual life, meditation, action in the world, artistic performance, whatever. That the goal isn't just to have experiences. I think we need our social support systems, whether meditation groups or religious congregations or discussion groups or integration psychedelic groups, whatever you call them. I often hear, boy, we need groups for psychedelic awakening people to get together. And then I think, golly, we've got these institutions called churches and synagogues and mosques. Can we just tweak them a little, empower them a little, awaken them? There are these communities that support people through all the ups and downs of life, and they certainly could support the integration of spiritual insights as well.
And so do you find it being with Houston's statement that it's without kind of some kind of background that can be less useful, the experiences can be
Yeah,
less.
well, perhaps if you've got a background, you may have a vocabulary, uh, a, s- a community, a set of concepts to facilitate integration and to move ahead more strongly. Um, but with and without psychedelics, these experiences do occur in very naive, surprised people sometimes.
Right.
And then do they want to join a church? Do they want to start meditating? I certainly would encourage them to find some structure that helps share the insights and be nurtured and supported in the spiritual life. Yeah. There's many different ways. Some people might uh, take up dancing or uh, go hike the trail in Spain or something like that. Lots of different ways. It's not, you don't have to sit in the lotus position and face a blank wall, though for some people that's very effective, you know. But you find what works for you and go for it. You know?
Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome, Keith. Hey, John.
I really don't have any questions so much. It's just so thank you for such a wonderful presentation. It was nice to see a lot of friends' names coming up there. Walter Houston Smith, Zolman Schechter, Maria Sabina, who I spent some time with in Mexico, and others. And it's just, I got in trouble because of the work that I did with psychedelics back in the 70s, but especially with the Methodist Church. They weren't happy with, they thought I'd done something that was illegal, and the whole wrong concept about what this experience was all about. So it's nice now that we can talk about this openly and see more coming in and more research and more openness to the experience that you had with the alcoholic was the closest description to my experience. It was hell, but it was heaven, and sometimes you just got to go through hell to get to heaven.
Yeah.
That's I really see the hell as the cleaning out of the ego. I mean, you're letting go of that. That was
Oh, hell's a
hard.
fascinating place to visit. Don't miss it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, let me just say, so I can say that I said it. Clearly, I don't want to encourage anyone to break laws.
Oh gosh, no, no.
Uh, and psychedelics are becoming legal in different contexts in different places.
Right.
Uh, if and when you want, if you've never taken a psychedelic and you would like to, certainly get well educated, um, find how to do it safely. Be sure you have the right dose and a pure substance with adequate support, and that it's medically a good idea for you. Um, but you may have to go someplace other than where you live
Right.
to do it legally, whether
Sure.
to the Netherlands or uh, maybe Oregon or Jamaica or different places in South America where it's integrated, in Mexico, where it's integrated into the culture and respected and uh, um, can be a very positive experience. Uh, the feeling of breaking laws and doing something illegal and being afraid of being arrested, that
Yeah,
affects your mental set, you
yeah,
know? And you want to be able to talk about it with other people, at least those closest to you that you'd like to share it with. Yeah.
Most of my experiences were in Mexico with Dr. Salvador Roquette, who was a psychotherapist and psychiatrist who led us deliberately through a design path, but it was wonderful. He knew what he was doing. Thanks.
On that same topic, Keith, would you like to say anything about what is going on in Oregon? I know that there are medically led programs in that area.
Yeah, actually, there's no medically led program. So psilocybin was decriminalized in the state, but it's also the state is also supporting a program where you can get trained as kind of a support staff for somebody to take psilocybin for a journey. There's very little support for it, though. There's not a lot of education ahead of time. Very briefly, no need for follow-up, no real medical evaluation to clear you for it. So it's all pretty new and just starting, and we'll just have to see how that goes. So there are long waiting lists, and it is also relatively expensive because you have to there are support staff that stay with you all day. But it is the beginning, and I'm sure that we're going to learn a lot. I'm sure Oregon will have some of its own challenges as it bumps along on this road. But other states are I think moving in that direction too soon. So we'll have to wait and see how all that goes. But I think the research has just been going very well. It's been very methodical, it's been very thorough, and it's moving slowly. And there's great value in these medicines that have been ignored for quite some time. So, learning from them will bring forth lots of new therapies for people and all kinds of mental health related issues, but there's also the spiritual front. And clearly, as a population, humanity humans seem to be losing a little bit of their humanity, and altered experiences with that touch the divine are probably the most powerful way to change people and to bring that humanity and open up people's hearts again. So from that standpoint, I think that's the work. And psychedelics can be helpful. Yeah, and so it's one of many, but we certainly need to move more toward that expansion. I see someone put in a comment that psilocybin is legal in Colorado. Yes, it's more than legal here. It's state-funded distribution, so that it's manufactured here. It's tested here. It's given to particular facilities, and so it's a little bit more of a official state-sanctioned process here in Oregon at this point.
Yeah, I understand. In Australia last week, the first two people received psilocybin in medical treatment outside of a research framework, just pure. Your doctor prescribed psilocybin and guides you through a session. Australia is leading the way right now, and they
Go
need
Australia.
a lot of education fast as to how to do. It's almost the cart before the horse. They have permission to use the drugs legally, and the professionals hardly know how to go about it yet. So a lot of good education is waiting for them.
So we have some questions in chat that I wanted to go over. We'll kind of touch on them rather quickly. Here's a question for you, Bill. When it comes to dosage, do you take into consideration the sensitivity of near-death experiencers who tend to need smaller dosages for any type of medication? There's a study done on near-death experiencers and their sensitivity to medication by PMH Atwater.
I don't know about near-death history itself. I don't have any statistics there, but there are clearly some people have very profound experiences with minimal dosage or even no dosage, and other people I remember an engineer in Germany who had 500 micrograms of LSD in his system, who thought he saw the air flimmering a little bit.
And that was it.
So,
Wow.
so more than dosage is involved, but it is a part of the picture. And
So it would vary for individuals, biochemistry, I think is what you're saying.
that's right. That's right. And
Yeah.
some people who have been traumatized a lot in childhood and life find it very hard to trust, to relinquish control, to kind of
Mm.
dive into the unknown. But that takes a lot of faith and courage. And that's why being in a good relationship is so fundamental to ensure the safety in on this frontier.
So here's the next question. When people claim to have certain experiences with UFOs, could those be a type of natural visionary
Oh,
experience without the use of psychedelics?
would be. I've
I
never
didn't have an
seen
answer for
a
that myself.
UFO. I'd
Right.
love. I dreamt about them landing in my backyard once, but that's as close as I got. Yeah, yeah. This is an alternative state of consciousness, and uh, there are so many incredible experiences that can occur in our minds. And it's one thing to own the experience, have it, but then the rational mind wakes up and wants to explain it or understand it and find words for it. And that's where it gets challenging, and different people may have different ways of expressing, integrating the same experience.
So in your various studies with addiction, was there a particular psychedelic that seemed to work better?
Well, I've done studies with LSD and psilocybin and dipropyltryptamine, and they've all been very promising. Um, I don't think of it, I think of these different psychedelics, frankly, uh, as really being different skeleton keys that unlock the same door. But the experience is not really in the drug, it's in the human mind. Does that make sense?
Makes
Course.
total sense. Yes. Yeah.
And the drugs differ from one another primarily in the length of action, in the speed of onset, in the amount of dosage required. Uh, DPT ends quite abruptly. All of a sudden, you know you're back. LSD has this bouncing ball effect that goes on for several hours. You kind of drift off and you're back, and you drift off and you're back. And then finally, you're back. you know. Uh, but as far as the content of the experience itself, I think you can find the same content with any of these substances.
Interesting. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. And I've got a couple more questions and then we'll go to the people with raised hands here. Here's more of a technical question, and it's a question on the issue of certainty. How does a scientist know, provide evidence, and create a solid body of understanding about what mystic experiences are? And the real question is, how can cognition and spirituality join forces? So that's a very interesting question, I think.
Yeah. Uh, I recommend Maslow's Psychology of Science. The idea that what we are approaching on this threshold is not anti-scientific. It's the frontiers of science.
Hmm.
There's science that wants to limit itself to what can be easily measured and controlled. And then there's true science, if you will, that is on the frontiers of knowledge, creating new concepts, new language, new models. And that's where we are on the psychedelic frontier. Was Einstein a good scientist? I like, yeah, I'd give him credit for being a pretty decent one, but he certainly incorporated the mystical, you know?
God, yes.
So here's a really big question, and I don't know if we're able to ask it or not, but I know that Suzanne is really interested. Do you know of any studies that measure long-term deltas in HRT and oxytocin levels post-treatment?
Hmm.
I do not. That doesn't mean those studies don't exist. I'd encourage you to go to your computer and see what you can find. And if you can't find it, design the study yourself and
There you go.
sure that it gets done.
All right, good. Now, what I would like to do is set the stage for the questions. First and foremost, they need to be a question. What we would like to hear is just a question for our panel. And so, Tucker, please come off of mute and we'll be happy to hear from you.
That was the most wonderful summation. The specifics of what we can do as both professionals and as individuals to speed up the process of both scientific and medical usages.
We talk about paradigm shifts, that what's unthinkable all of a sudden becomes normal. Are women bright enough to vote? Well, we don't debate that anymore. Of course they are, Are there other states of consciousness beyond the ego? Well, of course there are, as more and more people explore this, come to understand it, it changes the very idea, the very concept of who we are as a human species, This is pretty profound stuff. And there comes a point where all of a sudden a minority becomes a majority and what was unthinkable becomes normal. And we're approaching that in our understanding of psychedelics. Contrasting where we are right now with the 1970s, I don't know if many of you can remember that, 60s and 70s, psychedelics are going to make you jump off skyscrapers and make deformed babies and cause cancer and, and that's wild, crazy stuff was in the soap operas of the time, Oh my gosh, my child took LSD. He'll never be the same, Okay.
And that may be a good thing.
That's true.
Yeah, right. We're at a different place, and the press as a whole has been very responsible, accurately reporting the research findings. The films, Fantastic Fungi, and the Netflix How to Change Your Mind series, and so on, are educating masses in very constructive ways. There's a lot of people who will never read our articles in the Journal of Psychopharmacology, but they will watch Netflix.
That's right.
And attitudes are changing. I know when my book came out, a couple of my neighbors came over to talk about their psilocybin experiences, and it never would have occurred to me that they knew anything about it. So, there's a lot of people out there with some psychedelic experience, and we just need to teach them how to do it wisely and responsibly and safely.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. All right. So next up, why don't you go ahead and come off of mute and ask your question, Nabodi?
Thank you. And thank you so much, Bill, for your presentation. So my question is this: as an addictions professional, as a recovering addict, as a person with mental illness, my question is this: are psychedelics contraindicated in people with mental illness, for example, depression? Thank you.
Definitely not contraindicated for most people with depression, but you have to go about it wisely and carefully, and ideally in a treatment setting with a therapist you can really trust, and with the adequate preparation, good time for integrating the insights that occur. If you look at the literature, there have been a number of studies with treatment-resistant depression that have had very positive findings. So psychedelics have great promise in psychiatric treatment, wisely used. Some people may need a lot of preparation. They may need more time than the typical research project can offer, you know? But that doesn't mean it can't be helpful when these are available for treatment legally, and therapists can spend as much time as is indicated preparing for a session, okay? And integrating the insights that occur in a session. The insights aren't always, the initial insights are sometimes quite difficult, you know? Working through childhood trauma and guilt and early abuse and so on. That's not fun. It's hard work. So it's not just throwing the drug in your mouth for a miracle. It's an accelerator of the therapeutic process, and it can be very hard work. But yeah, it can be very helpful under the right conditions. Yeah. And
Thank you
let
so
me
much.
also say, you know,
Hmm.
some people, when they have the drug for the first time, kind of go straight to the mystical. And they have this beautiful, life-enhancing experience. But that doesn't mean they're saints. Okay. Another experience in another day might take them through St. John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul, you know, working through loneliness and rejection and childhood trauma. I wouldn't call that good trip, bad trip. I'd call that the spiritual journey. And I would trust the wisdom of your own mind in how it gets choreographed and presented. So when we give a psychedelic to someone, the major setting of the stage is to welcome whatever you discover yourself experiencing, to trust, let go, be open, let the music carry you.
Thank you so much. Great question. Appreciate that.
Very good.
And now, Dia Lynn.
Hello, Bill. I have not met you before, but my question in the chat was if you had worked with Dr. Stanislav Grof in Maryland.
Actually, Dr. Groff and I arrived in Baltimore at the same time. I came from Boston with my wife, and he came from Czechoslovakia. I think we even shared the same office. Yeah. So, yes, I know Stan well, though in the last 50 years, we've rarely seen one another. His life has unfolded on the West Coast with his writing and his work with holotropic breath work. And he's still, fortunately, with us. But he's made many contributions.
So I was trained by Stan Grof in 1991. So I've been a breathwork facilitator since then. And many of the experiences that you presented in your slideshow, very well presented, I might say, I've experienced without drugs.
Oh.
It's not just nuts. I mean, my psyche had been lubricated prior and I had, spiritual experiences. But I want to say to those people who are having difficulty with the legality of it, that it's entirely possible to experience any of these experiences through rapid breathing, because it also changes the neurochemistry. And but I've done it like repeatedly, dozens and dozens of times. So it doesn't all come at once. But I wanted to also ask the person who asked about Grof and his Psychonaut film, if there was some issue with that. I have not heard about that.
You'll have to take that up with Tucker.
Okay. Okay. So thank you so much. This was a great presentation.
Thank you, Dia. All right. So I think we have enough time for about 2 more questions, and then that'll be it. So, Lewis, let me add you in here. Go ahead.
Hi, Bill.
Hi there.
First of all, hello. Thank you for your work. I've been a big fan since I was 17 for the last decade. And as a graduate student exploring psychedelics from an interdisciplinary perspective, I'm wondering if you have what are the itching questions you have about psychedelics? What do you think are the most important areas to explore in the realm of psychedelics in academia specifically? Maybe specifically also exploring mystical experience and its role in human, ecological, cultural health.
As you know, there's all kinds of different projects going on in different countries and different diagnoses and so on. One area that hasn't been explored much recently is the work with psychedelics in the rehabilitation of prisoners. Or our country has more people locked up than any country on the planet, I think. And many of the so-called sociopathic tendencies, I think, could be treated with effective psychedelic therapy. If you can tap into a source of love within yourself, you develop maybe even an innate system of ethics, and you get connected to other people. And rather than locking people up for a lifetime, I think many of these people could be meaningfully brought into the mainstream of the culture. Work was done in the 60s and 70s in Holland, and Timothy Leary did do some very fine research with some early psychopathic tendencies people in Massachusetts. You can read those studies, but that research is still waiting for someone to carry the ball.
Great question. Wow. Thank you, Lewis. And good luck with your graduate studies.
Thank you. And if I may, I'm just going to share the public version of my thesis in the comments if anybody wants to read it. I invite you all to. Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
And I think we have enough time to hear from Lynn. Would you like to join us?
Oh, wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The question I have is I'd like to ask about Ram Dass. I love the man, the soul, the spirit. We were the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and now we're coming into it. And I think that's wonderful. Where the ultra rich who exert control are being penetrated by the people who want more spirit, and I'm deeply appreciative about that. Yes, and please tell me about Ram Dass. Thank you.
Well, I met Ram Dass when he was still Richard Alpert. That's a long time ago. But he certainly has made wonderful contributions. And he's certainly illustrates being a good scholar and also being a spiritual leader and maintaining some sense of humor and openness. He is missed, but he has made given us many gifts.
Thank you.
But, each of you listening to this program also have your own contributions to make. And beware of putting people up there on pedestals, The divine is manifesting within each of us, if you will. The namaste, I honor the divine within you. It's there even when we forget about it.
Thank you so much. And Lynn, thank you for your question. Appreciate that. I'm a big fan too. I've read a number of his books and lectures. This was amazing, Dr. Richards. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. As the inaugural kickoff of our program, The Seeker's Compass, you have done a marvelous job of setting the bar very high, and we're very excited to continue to stay in touch with you and hear how things explore on your path. And I am sure that you made lots of different interests, at least the peaking of the interest in a lot of minds and a lot of hearts. Thank you so much. Just a little background. Faiths Seminary is offering a deep dive into mysticism in the upcoming year. And as a result of our exploration of it, we have really had a lot of time looking at all the different ways to connect to God through the divine. And the mystical path is one that we find in all of the different major religions. So it's an opportunity for us to go even deeper into our understanding of connection. We're going to be exploring a number of different things that the ancient mystics did in Zen, A Course in Miracles, Vedanta, Kabbalah, nature mysticism, Christian mysticism, and at each level, we're going to be going deeper and deeper and deeper. And so the focus, one of the main focuses is on our spiritual practice. And that's one of the reasons why we started the Seeker's Compass, because what we want to be able to do is help each of us as seekers to go even deeper into our own personal exploration. If you're interested in a deep dive academic experience, we do have programs at Faiths Seminary as an Interfaith Minister with an emphasis in mysticism, a Master's of Divinity with an emphasis in mysticism, and even a Doctorate of Divinity with an emphasis in mysticism. And you can go to allfaithseminary.org to find out more. As part of the mystical program, we're going to be using the Seeker's Compass to speak to modern mystics. And what you'll find is as we bring all these wonderful people in and talk with them, they're going to be sharing their journey. They're going to be sharing their true north. What is their spiritual map? What compass are they using to find the divine? Ergo, the name of the program. And these are 2+ hour explorations, and they will be available to the general public for low or no cost. They are included in the mystical curriculum.